There is a person in your life who seems almost too considerate. They remember the details. They listen carefully. They never boast. And yet something is wrong. You cannot name it, you cannot prove it, but after every conversation you feel quietly diminished, as though the air has been gently removed from the room, and only they know where it went. This is not a bad person. This is not a villain. This is something far more complex, far more hidden, far more human. And here is what psychology has never quite told you about them. Everything you see is armor. The humility, the victimhood, the careful silence, all of it constructed. Not to deceive you, but to survive. To understand the covert narcissist, you have to stop asking what they do. You have to ask what they are protecting. Narcissism is one of the most misused words in modern psychology. We reach for it to describe bosses who ignore us, exes who never listened, public figures who seem immune to shame. And in most of those cases, we are picturing the same thing: someone loud, someone dominant, someone who walks into every room as though they own the walls. That type exists. Researchers call it grandiose narcissism. But there is a second type, quieter, more dangerous in its own way, and almost completely invisible. The clinical term is vulnerable narcissism. Some call it the covert subtype. It has been formally identified in psychological literature since 1991, confirmed again by researchers Dickinson and Pincus in 2003. And yet, in 2026, it remains one of the most chronically misdiagnosed conditions in mental health, often mistaken for depression, anxiety, or in women particularly, borderline personality disorder. The person with covert narcissism does not demand the spotlight. They deflect it. They are often described by others as deeply empathetic, self-sacrificing, even saintly. And those around them, partners, children, close friends, are left quietly confused about why they feel so alone. Here is what is actually at stake. You cannot protect yourself from something you cannot identify. And you cannot identify covert narcissism until you understand the architecture underneath it, where it came from, and why it was built. For decades, psychology focused almost entirely on the damage covert narcissists cause. Barely anyone asked the more disturbing question: what happened to them? To understand the covert narcissist, you need one concept: the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am something bad. These are not the same feeling wearing different names. They are entirely different psychological experiences. Guilt is transactional. It can be repaired, apologized for, resolved. Shame is ontological. It does not attach to behavior. It attaches to being. Research confirms this. Studies show that shame has a strong positive correlation with covert narcissism, while guilt correlates negatively. The covert narcissist is not racked by what they did. They are racked by what they are, or rather, by what they are terrified they might be. Heinz Kohut, the psychologist who first mapped the narcissistic self in clinical terms, argued that narcissistic wounding begins with caregivers who fail to adequately reflect a child's worth back to them. Not abuse necessarily, sometimes simply inconsistency. Overvaluation one moment, you are exceptional, you are better than others, followed by dismissal or punishment the next. Research by Brummelman and colleagues in 2015 confirmed that parental overvaluation specifically predicts narcissism. But here is the twist that almost no popular source mentions. It is the inconsistency, the oscillation between being made to feel special and being made to feel worthless, that produces the vulnerable type in particular. Picture what this does to a child's mind. If the most important person in your world tells you that you are extraordinary and then treats you as though you are nothing, what conclusion are you forced to reach? That you are both. That beneath the surface there is something fundamentally wrong with you. Something that, if discovered, would cost you everything. And so, the system begins. Hide the need, perform the virtue, never be fully seen. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. Because this system is not just coping, it becomes the entire self. Otto Kernberg, one of the most influential psychiatrists in the study of personality disorders, described how covert narcissists develop what he called internalized object relations. Internal voices built from the harsh, critical imagery of early caregivers. These voices do not simply criticize behavior, they become the architecture of identity. An inner tribunal, always in session, delivering verdicts the person cannot share because sharing would mean being seen. And this creates the central paradox of covert narcissism. They need to be seen more than almost anyone, and they cannot tolerate being seen at all. This is why the covert narcissist performs, not in the theatrical, obvious way of grandiose narcissism, but in the subtle, constant performance of goodness. They give relentlessly, they volunteer, they listen, they sacrifice, and underneath every act of generosity is a silent calculation. Does this confirm that I am not what I fear I am? Ask yourself this. If the covert narcissist's need for validation is identical to the grandiose type, and the research confirms it is, why does one seek admiration openly, while the other conceals it behind apparent self-sacrifice? Because the covert type has learned, somewhere early, that declaring the need is the most dangerous thing they can do. Researcher Dr. Claire Hart at the University of Southampton conducted a study with 88 participants. Using electrocardiogram measurements, her team found that people high in narcissism actually experienced decreased heart rates when watching a video of someone in emotional pain, the opposite of empathy. But when specifically prompted to take that person's perspective, their heart rate rose to match those of non-narcissistic participants. The capacity was always there. It was simply switched off. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part that nobody talks about, and the part that changes how you understand every interaction you have ever had with this kind of person. Here is what the official narrative around covert narcissism almost never says. The covert narcissist is not fundamentally a manipulator. They are a child who built a fortress, and then forgot they were inside it. Every behavior that reads as manipulation, the passive aggression, the victim positioning, the quiet withdrawal of warmth when they feel slighted, is not strategy. It is a defense system running on automatic, built for a world where being exposed meant being destroyed. Daniel Shaw, a psychoanalyst who studied narcissistic relational systems extensively, describes covert narcissism as a defense against early emotional invalidation, where vulnerability became so dangerous that it was converted, over years, into hidden grandiosity disguised as humility. The logic is almost elegant in its tragedy. If I am secretly exceptional, then my pain makes sense. It was not that I was worthless, it was that the world was not ready to recognize me. The world was told that covert narcissism is a predator's mask. The deeper reality is that it is a wound's disguise. This is not an excuse for the harm covert narcissism causes. The passive aggression is real. The manipulation is real. The way it quietly erodes the people closest to them is real. But understanding the engine beneath the behavior does something the symptom list never can. It locates the original fracture. And that matters. Not just for the people who love them, but for the rare few, and they do exist, who find enough awareness to look at the fortress they built and ask whether they still need to live inside it. For heritability of narcissistic traits sits between 40 and 60%, meaning at least half of this architecture is not fate. It was learned. And what was learned, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, can be unlearned. For decades, the question asked was, how do you survive a covert narcissist? Nobody asked the question underneath it. How did they survive becoming one? This is not ancient psychology. This is happening right now, in your office, in your family, possibly in your own reflection. Narcissism as a measurable trait rose significantly in American universities between 1985 and 2006. Researchers have tracked this, and the world those numbers were measured in was less connected, less performative, less built around external validation than the one we inhabit today. Social media did not create covert narcissism, but it provided it with a perfect habitat. A space where performance of virtue substitutes for genuine connection, where every act of apparent selflessness can be displayed, where the external mirror is always available. Most people, when they hear the word narcissist, picture someone impossible to miss. What psychology is now telling us is that the more dangerous figure is the one you almost never notice, until you are already inside their orbit, quietly wondering why nothing you do is ever quite enough. Now you know why, and knowing is the beginning. Most people will never trace this pattern back to its roots. Now you can. There is a person in your life who seems almost too considerate. Now you understand what that consideration is protecting. If this story deserved to be uncovered, next time, we go deeper into the psychology of the people who attract covert narcissists and why the pattern repeats across every relationship they enter. The truth, as always, is